Gentlemen, my name is Sherry Davis, and I'm the president of Temple Har Zion, a vibrant Reformed Jewish congregation in Thornhill. At Har Zion, we are very proud of our ability to connect, engage, and inspire our members as well as our community members. And so at the end of this evening, I hope you will see this panel discussion in that light. Justice Michael Tulloch has been a bit delayed this evening, but I am going to begin the program in his absence, since he will not be our first speaker of the evening. So before we begin, I want to thank my friend and colleague Sid Finkelstein for bringing up the idea for this program, to Gwen Yacht for working with us to further develop the program, and to Jay Goldberg for her marketing and graphic design work in communicating about this program. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all to the panel discussion entitled Courts, Communities, and Hate Crimes. According to the Toronto Police, a hate incident is a non-criminal action or behavior that is motivated by hate against an identifiable group. Examples of hate incidents include using racial slurs or insulting a person because of their ethnic or religious dress, or even how they self-identify. A hate crime is a criminal offense committed against a person or property motivated in whole or in part by hate, bias, or prejudice against an identifiable group. And an identifiable group may be distinguished by their race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical ability, sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression. In 2020, there was an increase in the total number of hate crime occurrences reported to the Toronto Police Service. Comparing it to 2019, reported occurrences increased by approximately 51%. In Halton, hate crimes reported increased by 160%. In Ottawa, 56.9%, and in London, hate crimes rose by 46%. The Jewish community, followed by the LGBTQ community, then the Black community, and the Muslim community were the most frequently victimized groups, with reported hate crimes against the Jewish community being double those of the LGBTQ community, which was the second largest group. However, hate crimes against Black people rose by 92%. Hate crimes targeting East or Southeast Asian people rose by 301%. And Indigenous hate crimes increased by 152%, while Canada's South Asian population rose by 46%. This is a problem not just of one community, but across identifiable groups. And given the rising incidence of reported hate crimes, we have to ask ourselves, how do the courts address hate in Ontario's communities in order to effect change? We will have 3 presentations this evening. We will begin with the presentations by each of the panelists, followed by a question and answer period. And given the size of the group here this evening, I'm asking that all further questions be submitted through the chat. Questions that were submitted earlier as part of your registration have already been shared with our panelists. So as I begin, I want to introduce our first panelist, Michelle Schlesinger. Michelle was educated at the University of Western Ontario, and following her call to the bar, Michelle has worked as both a family lawyer and a criminal defense lawyer. She has over 30 years of legal experience, having built a successful private legal practice. She's an expert in the fields of family and criminal law and has represented numerous clients in Superior Court and at jury trials involving a wide range of offenses, including homicides, possession of counterfeit currency, sexual assaults, robberies, and trafficking in heroin and cocaine. She has also appeared at the Ontario Court of Appeal. At the current time, Michelle serves as Manager, Legal Affairs of the League for Human Rights, an agency of B'nai B'rith Canada dedicated to combating anti-Semitism, racism, and hatred in all its forms at home and around the world. It advocates for human rights issues spanning the civil, political, religious, and cultural sectors. The League is best known for its annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents, which is cited worldwide by government agencies, social policy planners, and law enforcement bodies, and is considered the authoritative study on anti-Semitism in Canada. In her role, Michelle works collaboratively with external stakeholders and government officials in the development of position papers and advocacy efforts regarding emerging legal issues related to hate-motivated crimes and discrimination. She also works directly with the community and as a representative of B'nai B'rith Canada at community and government events. She holds a law degree from the University of Western Ontario and is a lawyer in good standing with the Law Society. Michelle is a mother of two and an active volunteer in her community. Welcome, Michelle, and over to you. Oh, are we having a problem?
She's muted and nobody's told her to unmute.
Michelle, you can unmute. Okay, there you go.
Without the unmute, in trouble. Thank you very much. I was just wanting on behalf of B'nai B'rith Canada then to thank you at Heart-Sion for hosting this panel discussion, and obviously with these distinguished jurists, and for creating this forum, giving all of us the important opportunity to discuss these important topics of vital interest to our communities, namely hate crimes and how our courts address these. If our listeners remember only three things from what I have to say tonight, it is the following. B'nai B'rith Canada is well positioned to know about, document, and fight anti-Semitism and hatred in all its forms. Number two, we take action forcefully through the courts and the justice system. And number three, we provide social services to our community and to those who have been victims of hate. Before I dive into the details of a particular decision, a little bit about the organization, a little bit more I think I'll add about the organization I represent and what we do. B'nai B'rith Canada is indeed a leading Jewish advocacy and human rights organization, and the oldest independent one too, which was established actually in 1875 and serves as the grassroots voice for the Jewish community. Our support comes from people like you, which makes all the difference, because the fact is we would be unable to do our work without you. And no, I'm often asked, so please allow me to clarify, we do not receive UJA support. For some reason, I'm always asked that question. We're empowered to speak to government and media because of the support, however, we receive from tens of thousands of Canadian families with diverse backgrounds and interests. Human dignity is central to and informs the work we do, and it's a key concept reflected in international conventions and other documents, because dignity or equal treatment for every individual is really the ideal we're striving to achieve. And Canada has certainly obligated itself to international treaty obligations and commitments that even sometimes limit expression in the interests of promoting human rights and dignity and seeing all of us as one human family. Thus, we provide broad-based social services too, including sustainable and affordable housing for seniors, low-income and disabled individuals, and quality programming for seniors. And now with COVID-19, we've pivoted. And with the help of some very, very dedicated volunteers, B'nai B'rith Canada has provided since the start of the pandemic, uninterrupted and weekly, over 12,000 boxes of healthy kosher food, which we've packed and delivered to those who are food insecure. We've provided tablets delivered and picked up weekly to use for the week with content designed by B'nai B'rith Canada, including video tutorials on a wide variety of subjects that include exercise, health, wellness, art-based courses, yoga, meditation, music, Yiddish, Hebrew, Torah, Parsha. These are opportunities, though, in addition, for seniors to interact with the volunteers in our community. And we do much, much more. But what drives all of this is what we believe in: equality, diversity, true inclusion, and justice for all. Together with its League for Human Rights, the advocacy arm of B'nai B'rith Canada, we focus on articulating the views of the grassroots Jewish community on issues which impact and are of importance not only to the Jewish community, but also the broader Canadian public. We're dedicated to fighting and one day eradicating racism, bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hatred in all its forms, with a focus on the unique aspects of these challenges in a Canadian context, and using what we learn to advocate for human rights globally by combating not only anti-Semitism, but all forms of racism and bigotry in Canada, which have no place in our country. Of course, we fight again for human dignity and equality, and that's why we've spoken out on many contemporary human rights issues: the injustices faced by Indigenous people in Canada and minorities such as the Uyghur Muslims in China, the Yazidis in the Middle East, racial injustice against various individuals, against the Asian community, against the Black communities, cognizant of the kinds of figures that's been just a moment ago brought to our attention. And we continue to advocate for and take on difficult issues, such as the listing of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, as a terrorist entity, which is responsible for human rights violations, including the downing of flight PS 752, in which more than 80 Canadian residents were killed. We joined Justice 88 and other Iranian Canadian diaspora groups in calling for full disclosure of human rights violations by the Iranian regime concerning the mass murder of thousands of political prisoners in the summer of 1988 at the hands of the Iranian regime, those who opposed the brutal Islamic regime were murdered. B'nai B'rith Canada also has a very long history, which continues to this day, of intervening in civil, criminal, and administrative law matters. We've been granted intervener status by courts and tribunals where we've identified a unique interest in the outcome. We move to intervene on issues of importance to our communities who will be affected by the decision, where our submissions can assist in contributing to the court's understanding of the issues. We've been recognized, I should say, with fellow interveners. I'm thinking of the Finta decision, for instance, as experts in human rights in general. That's part of taking a stand on global and domestic human rights issues. In addition, the League for Human Rights receives calls and emails daily, and now both incidents of hate online and offline can be reported to us through the first anti-hate mobile app that we've launched, which incidentally is free and available on Android and Apple platforms, both in English and in French. And it can be downloaded, incidentally, from the App Store under anti-hate, I understand. Confidentiality is always maintained in dealing with us, in dealings that people have with us, of course. And as alluded to a moment ago, since 1982, it's true, we have published our annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents, which is the definitive and only report of its kind in Canada, and which has been cited by the State Department, Statistics Canada, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Office for Democratic Institutions, and the Human Rights, the Cantor Center, and I could go on and on for the study of contemporary European Jewry in Tel Aviv. We are, however, as stated, particularly empathetic to the pain of others, because as Jewish people, we know all too well where this destructive force of hate inevitably leads. We hear from Holocaust survivors and descendants of Holocaust survivors. And sadly, just as noted a moment ago in terms of hate figures, our 2020 audit revealed that an unwelcome record was set in Canada
Michelle, you're freezing.
for anti-Semitism for a 5th consecutive year. Am I hearable now?
Yes,
to
you
speak?
are.
Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you for letting me know. So as I was saying, we hit a record this year in 2020, and I believe we had some 2,610
No, and we have you freezing again.
incidents, as opposed to hate crimes, as the I hope I can be
You're
heard
back.
now.
You're in and out a bit. You're back
I'm-
again.
Okay, I'm in and out. Okay, so as I was saying, thank you for letting me know. Our annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents lists matters that reach the threshold, and some and many do not in terms of criminality. So we recorded over 2,000 incidents, a third successive year, by the way, in which the 2000 plateau was exceeded, and was generally an increase of 18.3% of recorded anti-Semitic incidents in comparison to 2019. In any event, with all this in mind, I now want to finally turn my attention to one recent example. In a case of called Regina and Kruplin and Wazikuich that I wanted to briefly discuss with you. It was a criminal court proceeding held fairly recently in Burlington involving two fairly young individuals. It's a good example of the sort of work we do, and that's why I'm putting it forward for you folks. These individuals were both 23 years of age, had no prior criminal records. They both pled guilty to identifiable groups, Jewish people and Black people. Their actions by today's standards, and as noted by the court, were quite low tech. They cut posters up, they put posters up, pardon me, on the outside of an art gallery in Burlington and another two nearby at the Burlington City Hall. They were hateful posters that depicted Jews and Blacks as vermin to be eradicated. And they showed a Jewish man being bound and shot in the back of the head. And another poster depicted an Israeli flag within a red circle and a red diagonal across it. Knowing that we are in a very unique position to provide a community impact statement, I want to emphasize impact, which courts are required to consider when fashioning the appropriate sentence. We Neighbourhood Canada submitted our community impact statement. And through this, we were able to testify to the impact the actions of these individuals had on the communities they targeted. Rabbi Stephen Wise of Sha'arei Bethel congregation in Oakville also read in his statement. Statement was read in on behalf of the Halton. As we did, I'll see the negative impact on the lives of individuals and communities affected by the hateful publications at the center of the then current proceedings involving these two individuals and the posters. Because among other things, we operate an anti-hate hotline. And just as we as described previously, quote, contacted for many reasons and on multiple occasions, almost every single day, by our Jewish and also our non-Jewish communities who bring to our attention incidents of discrimination. Hate must be pursued. And because of our stated mission and internalized values, we made known just how evil and chilling we found these posters publicly displayed to be, and how despicable they were for the loathsome messages they carried. We made it known that we felt a sense of brothers and sisters in all our minority communities who have a right to feel and be safe. And the result was that justice followed. A detailed sentencing, a detailed judgment, a fair sentence, and we appreciate that sentencing does not follow a biased exercise course that takes into account not only the circumstances of the offender, but also those of the offense to arrive at a result that speaks to various sentencing objectives. These individuals now do have criminal records. We heard the court loud and clear when it told us that clearly, quote, these acts had a significant impact on the two communities that they targeted. The court noted that the message, quote, must go out loud and clear, that conduct such as that engaged in by these young men will not be tolerated in Canadian society. And if it is engaged in, it will be met with a severe penalty. So every single day we take action and lead the fight to make a difference to our communities. Number one, Nabrith Canada is well positioned. We take action forcefully through the courts and the justice system. And finally, we provide social services to our community and to those who have been victims of hate. Thank you again for your attention. And
Thank you, Michelle. I think you're having some difficulty with your local network bandwidth. So I thank you very much for your remarks. And I think we're going to move on to our second speaker. And our second speaker is Harvey Brownstone. Justice Brownstone was called to the Ontario Bar in 1983, and he began his legal career that same year working as a legal aid defense lawyer in the Toronto Criminal Court. He took an interest in family law and became a clerk for the recently retired Supreme Court of Canada Justice, the Honorable Rosalie Abella, who inspired him. Following his clerkship in 1989, he joined the Ministry of the Attorney General Support and Custody Enforcement Branch, now known as the Family Responsibility Office. In 1991, he was appointed legal director of the Family Support Plan and then director of the entire program in 1992. In 1995, at the age of 38, he was appointed a judge of the Ontario Court of Justice. In 2009, Justice Brownstone published a national best-selling book, Tug of War, A Judge's Verdict on Separation, Custody Battles, and the Bitter Realities of Family Court, in an attempt to demystify the complex family law, clearly explain how family court works, and give parents essential alternatives to resolve their own custody battles and keep their kids out of the often damaging court system. It is interesting to note that all proceeds from the sale of Tug of War were directed to the Children's Wish Foundation. Justice Brownstone has been a trailblazer in several ways. He was the first openly gay judge in Canada. He's been a role model in the LGBTQ community. When same-sex marriage was legalized in Canada in 2003, he was the only judge to make himself publicly available to officiated weddings for lesbian and gay couples traveling to Toronto from all over the world to get married. In 2007, he officiated at the wedding of Edith Windsor and Thea Spire, the American couple whose marriage triggered the 2013 United States Supreme Court decision overturning the definition of spouse in the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Justice Harvey Brownstone.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody can hear me. If I start freezing, please let me know. So just want people to know that, first of all, thank you to Temple Heart Zion for inviting Justice Tulloch and myself. This is a very unusual evening because you're going to hear from a trial judge, that's me, and then you will hear from my dear, dear friend and colleague who is a Court of Appeal judge who has the opportunity to see cases from a different vantage point than I do. I have been a judge 26 years, and the first 19 years were in family court, and then I moved to criminal court in about 7 years ago. So I do both levels of trial. Hate crimes are, in my experience, mostly directed towards people of color, Indigenous people, and members of the LGBTQ community. I'm very happy to say I have not had any cases of anti-Semitism come before me except directed to me. I have to tell you that as a Jew, I have had, when I was in family court, I certainly had many litigants who were Muslim who objected to having a Jewish judge adjudicate their family court case. I also had people who knew that I was openly gay object to have a gay judge as well. And so I will talk a little bit about that as well. But in terms of the hate crimes that I've seen in criminal court, I have to say that in recent years, there's been a surprising increase in cases involving young people. We used to call them young offenders, now we just call them young people. And that is very disturbing to me, that a young generation of people have developed this kind of bitterness and hatred towards the other, anyone who is an other. The anti-Black racism has definitely escalated. And I have to say that, in my opinion, the internet has really contributed to this ability to be anonymous and to spew racist and anti-Semitic garbage with impunity. There's no accountability on the internet. Anybody can say whatever they want anonymously. You look at the comments sections of people's posts, and it's just very, very alarming. And I really don't think the law has kept up with this. It's a major challenge. But I have to say that the internet has most definitely shown it's become really a bit of a sewer when it comes to racism, anti-Semitism. I will also tell you that and I have no proof, this is just anecdotal, but I must say that the President Trump years definitely unleashed a certain liberty that people took, a certain license to be not only express their anger, but their racism. It certainly escalated in the last 4 to 5 years. The pandemic has had the unfortunate effect of augmenting and intensifying mental health issues. The level of anger that we're seeing in the courts is unprecedented. We used to see a lot of anger in terms of road rage, lots of cases involving road rage, people just losing it on the roads because they're so angry, they're so frustrated, and getting into all kinds of fights. And it's very, very common in road rage cases that if one of the parties is a visible minority, there will be racial slurs, racial hatred demonstrated. And that's very disturbing. I want you to know that the courts take this very, very seriously. It is an aggravating factor on sentencing. When someone who commits, let's say, an assault, but during the commission of the assault, they speak, they issue racial slurs or anti-Semitic slurs, that is an aggravating factor that the courts take into effect on sentencing. Of course, the question is what to do about it as a judge. I can tell you that my personal view is every single time there is a hate crime committed or hate is an aspect of a crime, I require the offender to produce an essay, a 500-word essay minimum that they have to come back and read in open court about the hurtfulness of racism and what they need to do about it, what we should do about it. I want them to get some insight into the harm that racism causes. Now, Toronto is a very multicultural, a very diverse place. And on the surface, it's easy to say that this is a model community of people who get along. But the truth is, there's a lot of tension in Toronto. There is a lot of unhappiness, misunderstandings in Toronto. One of the things that's always troubled me as a family court judge is that many of our new immigrants who do come to Canada from third world countries are coming from countries where women have no rights, where children have no rights, and where it is perfectly legal not only to treat women and children like property, but to be violent towards them. And when they come to Canada and they engage in the behavior that was perfectly legal back home, they find themselves in the courts in culture shock. And it has always troubled me that it has been the judges that have the obligation of teaching what I call Canada 101. We are the ones that seem to be the people that tell new immigrants to Canada that it is not okay to beat up your wife or children, that women do have the right to get a job or drive a car or have an opinion. And it's extremely frustrating when you have litigants in family court or criminal court who say, I can't tell you how many times I've had someone say to me, you're not my judge. You have no authority over me. Allah is my judge, not you. And it's a very complicated thing because we have to be sensitive to people's, to where they've come from and their own perspective. And we have to find a way to help new arrivals understand that if you are from a country that hates Jews, that's not okay here. And it's not okay to engage in behavior that was perfectly legal back home. It takes time. And I don't know whether we're doing a very good job in terms of immigration, but I can tell you as a frontline judge in the trenches that it's very frustrating to have people who don't get it. They don't understand our basic common values. They don't understand concepts of equality and dignity for all. And it's now I'm generalizing. Obviously, there are many people who do. But there is a sizable community of people who just don't understand. They haven't really been told. It hasn't been explained to them what being a member of Canadian society is all about. And we have to do better because what happens is that the hatred, the misunderstandings, the hatred can be passed down to their kids. There's a level of, if we want people to understand and to have a truly inclusive and diverse society, everybody's got to understand the rules. And it's frustrating for judges who aren't really in a position to provide that kind of social acculturation. And we are left with having to sanction bad behavior. But I point that out to you to give you a flavor of what it's like in the trenches in a city like Toronto, which is so diverse. But please know that the courts do take hate crimes extremely seriously and try very hard to spread the word through sentencing and through orders made in family court, restraining orders and custody and access orders, that it will not be tolerated and that the consequences, especially for spreading hate, are severe and will generally result in a period of incarceration. So I'll leave it at that to give time for our other speakers. I'm very much looking forward to Justice Tulloch's comments and also to engaging with all of you. And thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome, Justice Brownstone, and thank you for your remarks. I'm pleased to say that Justice Tulloch has been with us for some time, heard both of our previous speakers, so give me the opportunity to introduce him. Justice Tulloch came from a humble family background in Jamaica, but his family believed that education was the way forward to a better life. He came to Canada at age 9, making him one of the few judges on the top provincial court born outside of Canada. His career began at York University, studying economics and business before attending Osgoode Hall Law School. He was appointed an assistant Crown attorney in 1991, where he worked both in Peel and Toronto. In 1995, Justice Tulloch entered private practice, specializing in criminal law. While in private practice, he was also appointed a special prosecuting agent with the Federal Department of Justice. He's participated in commissions, including the Ontario Government Review on Civilian Oversight on Policing, the review of the Ontario Legal Aid Plan, and the Criminal Code review conducted by the Federal Attorney General and the Minister of Justice. He was appointed to the Superior Court in 2003, followed by his appointment to the Court of Appeal in 2012. He's been an active advocate for justice, appointed by the Ontario government to lead an independent review of provincial regulation on police street checks, or carding, a practice that Justice Tulloch has said has a negative impact on Indigenous, Black, and other racialized communities and should end. The Ontario government has introduced the first regulation in Canada to better govern the use of street checks, but has not banned them. Justice Tulloch has said that what guided him was a passion for justice and an idealistic nature. We are all very fortunate to have him as a speaker this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Justice Michael Tulloch.
Great, thank you so much for your introduction, as well as for the invitation to speak to this very august body of people. I'm really honored to be here this evening. I see a lot of my friends online, and I want to thank all of my friends for attending. But I'm especially honored to be on a panel with my good friend Harvey Brownstone, or Justice Brownstone. And he's someone that I love dearly. He's been a friend, and he was a judge that I appeared before when I was a very young lawyer, and he was a young judge. And Harvey, you always treated me with respect, and you gave fair justice to my clients. And so for that, my good friend, I really, really respect you and will always appreciate you. And you know, and it's an honor to see you and to be on this panel with you. And Mikhail Schlesinger, you know, I remember Mikhail from when we were both young lawyers, and we're still young, but we're in different path. And it's certainly an honor to be here as well with you, and to see the work that you're doing in advocating for justice and for the Jewish community through B'nai B'rith, which is an organization that is important for for not just your community, but for all of our communities. Again, I also want to just say a special thank you to Sid Finkelstein. And Sid and I've known Sid since I was a student, actually, in university. And he has led me down a very, very positive path. I became involved with the YMCA through Sid. And Sid, it's been years. I don't even want to age either of us by stating how long we've known each other, but I really appreciate your friendship, and I certainly miss seeing you at the Y, my friend. But anyway, hopefully this pandemic will be over with soon, and we can be free to see each other again. Now, I just want to repeat a poem that is dear to me, and it captures the essence, in my view, of hate crime. Before I do that, I see Justice Lamkin, retired Justice Lamkin, online, and I've not seen him for years. And he was one of the first Black judges to be appointed to the Ontario Court of Justice, and he has left a legacy for all of us in terms of his jurisprudence and the path that he has paved for us. And I just want to give a contextual reference to the importance of the Jewish community and the Black community in collaborating together to fight issues of injustice and hate. And I can say this because I am a student of history, and one of the things that I learned at a very early age, and I can say that Martin Luther King was someone who was a real inspiration to me as a child growing up. And it's by my familiarity with Martin Luther King's biography, his life, and his legacy that I was attracted to issues of justice, which eventually led me into the into the discipline of law. But what I did learn was that during the 1950s and 60s, when Martin Luther King was fighting for justice for Blacks in the United States, his biggest supporters were from the Jewish community, and his biggest supporters were rabbis and people who were, some of whom were children of the Holocaust, or who had members or families who had died in the Holocaust, who could really understand the pain of hate and the consequences of us not all standing together for justice. And it's interesting because this came home to me when I was a young Crown attorney in Toronto, and I was working. I was working down at the College Park Court prosecuting cases. And one day, one of the judges brought me into his chambers, and he was, to me at that time, an old Jewish judge. And I finished my cases for the day, and he says, "Come back here, I want to talk to you." And he brought me in, and he showed me a picture of himself on his bookshelf, and it was himself, Martin Luther King Jr., and and a minister. I think it was an Anglican minister. And this particular judge was Martin Luther King's lawyer here in Canada back in the 1960s. And he made a copy of this picture, and he gave it to me, and it's framed, and it's in my studies. So it really touched me that I was able to, at that point in time, sort of come full circle. Although I was, I'd never met Martin Luther King Jr., but he was someone that inspired me, and through his life and through his pursuit for justice and his connection with the Jewish community. A Jewish lawyer in Canada was able to assist him here. And I happened to have been a young Crown attorney in his particular court. Again, as a student, one of the organizations that was dear to me was an organization called it's an organization that was formed by Rabbi Gunter Plaut and one of my former professors, or he was a professor of sociology at York, Dr. Wilson Head, the Urban Alliance on Race Relations. And the whole purpose of this organization was to unite a diversity of groups here in Ontario and in Toronto to come together and to work collaboratively to fight against hate and to collaborate for the good of our communities. Now, the poem that I was thinking about is a poem that was written by Martin Niemöller, who was a Lutheran minister who from Germany, who lived during the time of the Holocaust. And he wrote this after the Holocaust. And I think it was a reflection or an introspection on his own apathy during the time of the genocide of the Jewish people. And he says, first they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. And I think that captures the essence of why we as a community have to work together to eradicate hate. I'm a judge, and so I'm not an advocate by any means. I used to be at one point, but I just want to make it clear that I'm no longer an advocate. But I think that we all have a responsibility to ensure that the society in which we live is a society that is just and it's fair for all peoples. And, you know, it's not surprising to me that there is an increase in hate crimes and hate activities. And for a long time, I think the Jewish people have been the one who have been advocating for some form of legal recourse to these kinds of actions, because you know you've been affected by it directly. And then, you know, as Blacks started to come to this country, and or newer immigrants started to come to this country, and they started to experience the differences, right? The otherness that is usually endemic in a pluralistic society. they started to speak out. And unfortunately, though, other groups who, and I'm just being frank, that did not experience some of these kinds of hate and experiences, they were very silent and apathetic to us. And one of the realities, though, that I think is inevitable is that, you know, today it may be me, but if you allow the injustice to prevail, and if you don't speak out to assist me, then guess what? Tomorrow when you're attacked, then I will not be there to help you. And that's why it's so critical for us to see ourselves as one community, working together as one to ensure that the society that we live in is a just society, a society where our children can feel a sense of security and a sense of goodwill towards each other. And, you know, because one of the other things that I've, you know, realized over the years is that fundamentally our commonalities are way greater than our differences. And we may come from different cultures, different ethnicities, different socioeconomic backgrounds, but most of us, we have the same set of values, and we want the same things for our children and for our families. And that is to live in a peaceful and a just society where your kids and your grandchildren can have a sense of peace and security. And I think regardless of what background you're from, that's really what most of us want. And I think the majority of us are law-abiding, hard-working citizens. And, you know, we should see that in others. And I think it's almost, I would be remiss if I did not mention that tomorrow is a day of reflection for all of us, as it is the day to reflect on the Truth and Reconciliation observances that we as a country have considered important for the indigenous peoples of this land. And as we speak about hate or anti-hate speech, and I've spoken before about the legal framework that governs these kinds of crimes. We should also reflect on how can we as a society make this world a better place for all, the Jews, the Blacks, the South Asians, East Asians, and the indigenous peoples. And I think if we put these issues at the forefront of our collective agendas, then our collective voices will be that much stronger to eradicate the voices of hate. We'll never be able to silence hate, but at least we can, with our voices of our collective voices of love and togetherness, we can isolate them so that, you know, they will not have any kind of traction in the society in which we live. And so, those are really the thoughts that I'd like to share with you. And I'd just like to close on this, just a note that I always sort of kept, or I keep at the forefront of my mind. And it's a saying by Martin Luther King Jr. And it was written by him in 1963, and it rings true 60 years ago as it does for me today. And he says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And, we should always remember that. And whatever we do, we should ensure that injustice and hate does not in any way define us or the societies in which we live. But we as a people, as a community, should always move to stamp it out. Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice Brownstone. Appreciate it. And Justice Lemkin, we feel privileged that you've joined us this evening. The next segment.
That was Justice Tulloch.
Oh,
That was Justice
oh,
Tulloch.
no. Yes, sorry. Thank you. I was already moving ahead to the idea of whether I was even going to invite Justice Lemkin, see if he wanted to say a few words. So Justice Tulloch, my apologies. Thank you very much for your remarks.
That's okay. You know what? I'm better looking than Harvey anyway, but he's always.
I
Just-
will not weigh in here. I will not weigh in on that.
No, I love
did-
him anyway. So you can always interchange us.
I did want to say to Justice Lemkin, who I know is, I also saw earlier, we are privileged to have you here and thank you. The next section of our program is to deal with some of the questions, both that came in and questions that have come up on the chat. So what I will do is ask each of our three panelists to just mute themselves and unmute themselves when they would like to weigh in on some of the questions. And I tried to circulate them to you late this evening, but I hope you've had a chance to take a look at them. So let me ask one of the questions, whether it's too late to address hate in the community by the time cases or disputes and trials reach the courts. You're muted, Justice Tulloch. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Can you just repeat your question again?
Certainly. Is it too late to address hate in the community by the time cases or disputes and trials reach the courts?
So my view is it's never too late to address hate. I think it's a constant, we have to constantly address it because, history keeps repeating itself over and over again. And, I think hate, conflict, it's something that will be with us forever. As long as there are different groups, as long as there are different religion, as long as there are different ways of life, there will always be a reason for people to pit other issues against, other groups. So I think, we never stop addressing it. But when it gets to the courts, I think that's a whole different forum where, the justice system takes over and, you can't really, and it's limited, by the way, what the justice system can do. So I think you address it in the community, you address it through education, you address it through community organizations, through religious organizations, through ordinary people being involved in their communities and working together to stamp it out.
Thank you. Justice Brownstone, do you want to weigh in?
Well, the only, I totally endorse what my better looking other half says about the topic. I would just add that when someone is charged with a crime, if they are released on bail pending the trial, which can be a year or 2 years later, they're subject to conditions. And sometimes that delay that we all see until the trial happens is actually quite beneficial, because the person is bound by certain conditions not to not to associate with certain people who may be a bad influence, not to go to certain places. And that's hanging over their head for a long, long time, even before the trial. And sometimes those bail conditions have the effect of deterring future behavior, so that by the time the trial comes, if it's 2 years later, and that's not uncommon, by the way, for cases to take 2 years or more, they've already got the point. So don't ever think that delay means nothing, because when you're charged with an offense and you have that hanging over your head, it is a certain pressure that can have a positive effect in terms of shaping future behavior. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Schlesinger, would you like to comment?
Well, first of all, I just want to reiterate my thanks for having us here, and what a privilege and an honor it is to be here, obviously, with Justices Tulloch and Brownstone. As for the question posed, we just couldn't agree more wholeheartedly with everything that's been said. And some of these remarks are so moving, because they're just so they're so true. We have to be proactive and not simply reactive. And in that period of time, while people are on bail, I'm sure there's much they can do. But in addition, as Justice Tulloch has pointed out, we have to do our part within the communities towards one another. We have, as Justice Tulloch has pointed out, so much in common, all of us, and far less that's different, and far more that's in common. We all have the same hopes and the same dreams and the same aspirations. And I have to say that I've always taken great heart from the quote, actually, that Justice Tulloch mentioned from Martin Luther King about the denial of rights anywhere is a threat to the affirmation of human rights everywhere. We have to listen to one another. We have to understand our mutual experiences. I mean, that really matters. We have to understand our identities, and we have to understand as well the importance of education. We actually at Neighbourhood Canada support mandatory education on the Holocaust, on genocide, standardized education, because of all the lessons we can learn from the Holocaust, and the applications of these lessons to contemporary acts of genocide. It's that education is very important as well, and it has to be stressed. To what do you take from historical lessons to today's acts of hatred? It's very important in that respect. And so it's something that we've certainly been endorsing for some time. Once again, we have that history with many groups, certainly at Neighbourhood Canada as well. We have a special advisory committee composed of quite a diversity that represents, I think it's diverse community leaders. I think we have over 35 nationalities actually represented. And that's just from the GTA's diverse communities. We have to learn from one another. We have to work together. And Justice Tulloch indicated, if I may borrow from his very wise words, it's an opportunity to isolate the others rather than be isolated. It's all so true. As I said, we take great, we look back sometimes at just as he's indicated, as an example at how the the Black community and the Jewish community worked together in the United States in the 50s and 60s. We marched together to achieve civil rights, even in the face of violent denial of voting rights. We joined the struggle, and it really speaks to the need for each group not to have to combat racism on its own. No group should really have to fight the fight on its own. Everyone should be supporting the other's fight, because it's all of our fights, just as described by Justice Tulloch.
I wonder if I can just add one more thing. Is my sound okay?
Your sound is fine.
Okay, I just want to add, I want people to appreciate that when we talk about hate crimes or racism, please don't have in your minds the idea that these perpetrators are always low educated, unsophisticated, lowlifes. I'm going to go out on a limb, since I'm only 3 months away from retirement. I'm going to say what I really feel and tell you that I can guarantee you that Justice Lampkin, who was one of our great role models, I appeared in front of him as a very young lawyer 40 years ago. He suffered immense racism from within the legal community and even from within the judiciary. And I won't speak for Justice Tulloch, but I will tell you that there is a sense of elitism. There is subtle racism. It's not the same as putting up posters, but I can tell you that as the first openly gay judge, I didn't have it easy among lawyers or my colleagues on the bench. So there's work to be done at every level. It is not just the people out there on the streets spraying graffiti everywhere. There's also the corporate glass ceiling. There is still subtle and not so subtle racism and elitism that happens. It's tough. It's still tough out there for people who are considered different in every circle.
Thank you. A question's come in from one of the participants this evening, and he asks, how do you as judges deal with litigants who challenge the judge's impartiality on the grounds that they're a member of Group X and the litigant is a member of Group Y, and Groups X and Y have centuries or decades of hostility amongst one another, and therefore, the litigant doesn't feel you can be impartial?
I guess I should start because I'm the one that raised it, right?
You are.
Well, I can tell you this happened to me very early on. First, because I was gay, and then, of course, because I'm Jewish. And I know there are women judges and judges, people of color who have had this happen to them, where people challenge their ability to remain impartial. And luckily, the legal test that is applied in determining whether a person can have a fair trial by an impartial jurist does not allow for those kinds of objections without some kind of concrete evidence that the judge has a prejudice or a bias. But it also applies to juries. There are certainly cases where a person who comes from a certain ethnicity may not feel they can get a fair trial if nobody on the jury is of their same ethnicity. I find it difficult to deal with, but I always say that I adjudicate based on the evidence. I go where the evidence takes me, and I'm completely colorblind when it comes to any other factor. I look at the evidence on the case in terms of adjudication, but I do bring my life experience with me, and I would be lying if I said that I was robotic about how I deal with people who have challenged who I am as a person. But I make it clear that, and I assure them that I always will have an open mind, and that I'm only interested in the evidence that's brought before me. And sometimes they are okay with it, and other times they say very unpleasant things, and I just keep going. I don't know what Justice Tulloch, how do you handle it?
You know what, Justice Brownstone, exactly the way you said it. Perfectly. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do, and I'm sorry that people think that if you're not exactly like them, you're not going to be able to be fair.
Right.
That's,
Yeah, it's a pretty high threshold for them to meet, right? And I think for good reasons. And so I really you know, I think most of us, I'd say probably the majority of judges, we're totally fair, and I'd venture to say that we have one of the best judicial systems in the world. So, you know, I think that we apply the law, and there's a legal test to, you know, when it comes to question of bias. And so the onus is then on the person raising the bias to establish on the balance of probabilities or the evidence that that you're going to be biased. I don't think it's very unlikely that that they will meet that threshold. So without evidence. But I totally endorse what you say, Justice Brownstone.
Well, let me ask another question. You've both, well, all three of you have referenced the importance of education in combating hate. Do you think that our educational system is failing to do a good job in making clear the dangers of hate speech, acts of hate, etc.? And the individual submitted the question is referencing what's happening at the Faculty of Law at U of T.
Okay, I don't want to get into what happened at the Faculty of Law at U of T, but what I can say is this, right? And I think that both Justice Brownstone and I should stay away from that issue, because we're judges and we can't sort of delve into issues that are possibly contentious and could very well be legally contentious. But what I can say is this, right? Like, I think that the educational system, to a large degree, is very deficient in teaching us, certainly me, as a student who went to school here in Canada most of my life, the level of history and the level of civic education that I think is necessary for us to understand the society in which we live, right? And I say that, and I'll give you an example. I mean, I knew nothing about the Indigenous history until recently, right? And I mean, I studied Canadian history, and I think the curriculum when I was in school, in grade 10, we had a Canadian history course. And in grade 9, we had Canadian geography. And then in grade 11, we had Middle Eastern history. And then in grade 12, you have a combination of both. And then in grade 13, when, you know, I'm old enough to have had grade 13, we were able to specialize in the kind of history that we were taught. But unfortunately, the history that we studied was purely from the perspective of the English and the French, right, as the founding nations of Canada. And so it eliminated, to a large degree, you know, the history of other important communities. Well, for one, the Indigenous history. I mean, I studied about Louis Riel and the Métis and so forth, but it was purely from a perspective of the French, right? And I think that's a deficiency that has led to a level of ignorance, right? That has perpetuated, to subsequent generations and to where we were at right now, right? And one of the problems, right? And I think with not acknowledging history and is that the people who were the victims of certain atrocities, who suffered any kind of oppression, and if that's not acknowledged, then that information still gets passed down from generation to generation, and subsequent generation only gets bitter, right? And so I think that a lot of what we see now is a reflection of a lack of acknowledgement of some of the historical events that have occurred that have been fallen on deaf ears within the school curriculum that is important for us as a society to come to grips with, so that we can then truly have a sense of reconciliation. So, you can't have reconciliation if you don't have truth, right? And if you don't know what the truth is, then how can you then move on, right? And so all that does is creates a continuum of conflict and anger. And so we as a society, we have to start being honest within ourselves. And I think that responsibility comes to all of us. And so hate is a reflection of ignorance, in my view, right? And so the case that Mikkel spoke about, it involved a 20-year-old and a 21-year-old, right, in Halton. These are young kids, but they were ignorant of the society in which they live, and so they thought they could go about, defacing synagogues and putting up derogatory, hateful posters against Blacks and Jews, and they thought it was okay. But it was because of the ignorance and the failure of our educational system to a large degree. So I think that we as a society have to take more responsibility for this, if at all we're going to eradicate this kind of behavior and criminality. That's my view. You're muted.
I apologize. You made me think about something that Justice Brownstone spoke about earlier in his remarks when he talked about how he often requires a 50-word essay. So the question is, are hate crimes treated differently than other crimes? Should they be? Why and how?
Well, first of all, it's a 500-word essay, not 50.
Okay, I thought I said 500.
And
Okay.
Yeah, I do think that hate crimes are definitely treated differently because it is a statutory, mandatory, aggravating factor on sentencing. It makes it worse. The sentence will be more severe if there was a hate aspect to it. So it may result in requiring the person to spend longer in jail or do some kind of community service that will hopefully open their eyes to the harm that hatred causes, or make their probation longer. But yes, they are treated differently for sure. And I can tell you that in any case I get where I know I'm going to be sentencing someone to for a hate crime, I make sure the media is there. I make sure the media is there. I want there to be coverage because the public has to know that this is not okay and that there are consequences for bad behavior that hurts other people.
Thank you. Michelle, Justice Tulloch?
Sorry, were you calling on me?
Just whether you had any comments to
No.
add.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's simply this, that media is so important. We do know that surprisingly, even seemingly well-educated or more educated people sometimes and often do engage in hate, which is so tremendously disappointing. Indeed, not all hate is explicit. Some of it is far more subtle. But coming back to this issue of education, when we speak about education and mandatory and standardized education, we're often referring to elementary, high school, which again sort of dovetails with what Justice Tulloch has indicated. We consider it very, very important because by the time we've reached, and we hope not to, a point where a hate crime has been committed or even hate speech has been heard, and it's often unfortunately heard online and so on, whether it's directed at, regardless of whom it's directed to, whatever minority community in Canada, Jewish community, religious community, at that point, we see it as something that has to be regarded as a public safety issue, actually. So naturally, we would like to see these issues addressed as early as possible within our communities.
Thank you.
Right. So all I would say is this, right? Like, I mean, just to add to it, I think hate crime is an aggravating factor in sentencing. It should be treated seriously by the courts, and it is. I actually think that, you know, when you look at the law as it has evolved from, let's say, 1979 through the 80s until now, I think that there's more of an understanding and a willingness for the judiciary to fine against individuals who are perpetrating hate. So, and like Justice Brownstone has indicated, it is an aggravating factor that is of the public's interest to know and to be aware of the potential penalties that can be incurred as a result of this.
Thank you very much. Can hate crime legislation effectively address speech on the internet, hate speech on the internet?
Well, I'm going to say that I think it should. I think that, you know, there's been an enormous effort by law enforcement to really stamp down on child pornography, which is an industry that was created on the internet. I shouldn't say it was created on the internet, but the internet proliferated large numbers of availability of horrible child pornography through these websites that people somehow access. And we see, you know, when I started as a judge 26 years ago, I never saw child pornography, and now it's clogging the court system. And the reason is because there have been very sophisticated technology implemented to identify which servers and which IP addresses people's computers are accessing these child pornography sites. And then there's a complicated process that the police utilize to identify these people and arrest them and search their computers and bring them before the courts. And I see hate crime as hate literature, hate messages, hate websites somehow get a free pass. They don't have, there isn't the same attention in law enforcement to that. But I think the technology does exist. I think it's possible. You can see it on certain social media sites like Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, they do have very sophisticated search tools that they use to screen out offensive posts and messages. It's not perfect, but they're at least making an effort. I just don't think law enforcement has really turned its mind to that. And it's very unfortunate because young people, you know, no matter what we try to do in the schools, the fact is that teenage kids are online all the time. All the time. And the pandemic made it worse because they've spent the last 2 years trying to go to school online. They're always online and they roam online, and parents are not supervising what kids are doing, what sites they're accessing, who they're talking to. And I really do think that we need to really create more public education for parents about exactly what some of the harms are for the internet. It is not okay to let your kids just surf the net and associate with whatever groups they happen to come across. And I would like to see the law strengthened, and I would like to see law enforcement focus more on shutting down these sites and on prosecuting people that proliferate hate on their websites, because these things really do go viral, they mushroom, and they foment. They really do. They really do. They plant ideas in young people's heads about other groups that are very hard to disabuse their minds of. So I'm all in favor of more strict law enforcement in that area.
Thank you. Any other comments on that?
Okay, so I just want to, I support what Justice Brownstone just said. And, you know, it's very interesting that you sort of highlighted the proliferation of pornography and child lore and so forth on the internet. And, you know, another big part of that is the use of the internet to not only proliferate hate, but to extort young people to the point where some of them have committed suicide, right? And I'm sure that we've all read various news articles which report these things. And I just want to read something. It's an article that came out in the Globe back on the 27th of June, 2018. And basically said that there was a poll that found that most Canadians at 85% are aware that online bullying is an issue, an increase of 5 percentage points from a similar survey in 2011. So 85% of this polling thought that cyberbullying, and cyberbullying is another form of cyber hate. But it also found that 1/3 of Canadian parents know a child in their community who has experienced cyberbullying. And 20% of parents also said their own child has been a victim. Those numbers have stayed nearly the same. In 2011, 31% of Canadian parents said they knew a child who had been bullied online, while 18% said their own child has experienced cyberbullying. About 3/4 of Canadians who responded to the survey said the issue requires special attention and existing measures don't do enough. I really think that it's organizations and ordinary people like yourself who need to address these issues with law enforcement and the legislatures, so that they're aware that you know, the community is really being victimized by this medium, and children, you know, it's the sad thing is, you know, there are too many kids that are killing themselves as a result of being victimized by online hate. And if that's continuing, and then I think that it's a problem. So I think that there needs to be more to be done about this kind of thing. So cyberbullying is an aspect of hate crime. And so I think that, yeah, it's a problem.
Thank you. Can the courts deal with situations such as store owners who promote hatred either towards the Jewish people or to the Asian community or any specific group, either through boycotts or through aggressive service or refusal of service?
Well, in terms of what the courts can do about that, if it constitutes an offense, if some offense has been committed, then yes, they can be prosecuted. It gets complicated because I suppose if a store, is the question relating to a boycott of a particular store? Or
No,
of
it's products from a specified group being sold in the store, not selling products and articulating that they're not and why. So whether it's not selling products from Israel or treating Asian customers aggressively or hostilely in a hostile fashion as they enter the store.
So all I would say is this, right? I don't know if Justice Brownstone and I can actually answer that question because it
Okay.
calls for a legal opinion. But I think just to sort of give you something to think about, there are human rights legislations that each province has that governs the way regulatory bodies should interact with people within a public sphere. But also you have to understand as well that people that own a store per se, right? They're private. A store is a private entity. And a customer is also a private entity. So, just like you as the owner of a private house, you can exclude people from coming into your house, right? With trespassers. There are to some degree, some level of let's say latitude given to private businesses to operate their businesses the way they should, but it's subjected to the human rights legislations that's applicable within the jurisdiction where they operate.
Thank you. I personally hear periodically the people ask the question, why should I report a hate crime? What's really going to happen if I report it? How would you respond to that?
Well, I think it's incumbent on all of us to report a hate crime when we witness it, because we know that these numbers are underreported. We know that for every case of domestic violence, there's far more than never gets reported. And that's certainly true of the online bullying that Justice Tulloch talked about. I'm so grateful he mentioned it. It's a huge, huge problem. And of course, we know there's far more hate out there than what gets reported. So the reason to do it is because we make people accountable for their behavior. I've learned as a judge over these 26 years that I can't make people change what they feel or how they think, but I can make them change their behavior. I can try to impose sanctions that make people change their behavior. And that's the best we can do in a society in terms of a justice system. So if we don't report, then they're getting off with not being accountable for the consequences of their behavior. And I believe that we do work in a justice system where these things are taken seriously. The police have a long way to go in terms of many aspects of how they relate to the communities. And Justice Tulloch has been an absolute pioneer in that regard. But I do believe that the police do take these things seriously, and the Crown attorneys do, and the courts do. So I hope people will have enough faith in the system. It moves at a snail's pace, that's for sure. It's very frustrating, but it is absolutely worth doing, because we have to stand up and be counted. We have to make people accountable for how they behave.
Thank you. I'm going to give the two justices a break for a moment and turn to Michelle Schlesinger and ask the question in regard to Anna Mae Paul and what has gone on over the last 10 months and the impact it has had on her, both her professional and her personal life. What was your perspective on what happened to the leader, to the past leader, immediate past leader of the Green Party?
Well, actually, thanks for the question, but we're very much a nonpartisan organization. We really don't affiliate with any particular political party.
Okay.
If we're speaking in general, however, about harassment and so on, I want to take this back to, if I can, to some of the other points that were made about online harassment, in particular about online activities. There's a lot of things that we could add. We could just have focused, for example, a whole talk on online hate. This might be a fitting opportunity, though, to mention that in terms of our own statistics, we divide it as between violence, vandalism, and harassment, both online and in person. So this notice in the fact that what's being noticed here is this increase in harassment online, for example, or bullying, discrimination, this kind of incidents. Of course, our document, the Annual Audit of Anti-Semitic Incidents, is not a comparative document. In no way minimizes, of course, the degree of discrimination and hatred towards all groups. But that is its focus. And even so, we noticed in 2020, one of the observations made was that incidents, first of all, of harassment constituted 95% of the total incidents for the previous year. And interestingly too, of the total number of incidents of harassment that occurred over that past year, 71%, as I recall, occurred online. And that speaks tremendously to the power of the internet and the work that has to be done in dealing with the proliferation of online hatred. Certainly we're catching up now because it was certainly the case that a couple of years ago, it could easily be said that it had moved ahead of the law and it badly needed and still needs regulation. I can indicate at our end that certainly, online anti-Semitism, for example, is a kind of, as you can see, a key subset of online hate in general. And it's proliferating, and it's really proliferating at an alarming rate. People are squirreled away, somehow meeting like-minded people in other corners of the earth that maybe they wouldn't have had a chance to meet. And there are these echo chambers that go on, and it has a tremendous effect. It's just to add to the many points that have been made. I mean, online harassment, and it leads to in-person harassment. I mean, it leads to real world consequences. It starts online in the online world, but it spills over into the real world. And we see that it leads to violence. So there's been a point made that, historically, and I can't speak to what's going on in the courts, of course, that it's led to suicide. I mean, I recall the case of Amanda Todd many years ago. However, running back to this point about online harassment and changing the landscape in terms of the laws, we've made, we have testified before, in 2019, I believe it was, before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. We offered some practical steps, if you will, on how to combat online anti-Semitism. We also testified in 2020 before the Interparliamentary Task Force to Combat Online Hate. We've made, we've taken a very active approach to this. There's a lot of work here to be done, proposals to the federal government. But one interesting idea that we put forward, which is why I'm mentioning all of this, is that we want to shift the onus from the providers to a government appointed body. So it would be an independent regulator without financial interest in all of this, and maybe creating, we've often spoken about it, a forum very similar to the Canadian Broadcasting Standards Council that would convene social media companies and representatives of different communities. And then together we can not only develop, but implement codes of conduct that would address harmful speech. So needless to say, there's a lot of work to be done there, but it's really important work that we're engaged in and that we think needs engaging in to make our real world environments safer by addressing this online threat. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, at this point in the evening, I want to thank our three esteemed speakers, Michelle Schlesinger, Justice Harvey Brownstone, and Justice Michael Tulloch. I would note that all three of these individuals are themselves engaged in public service of great import, and we should never forget that. We appreciate the insight and informative presentations you brought to us this evening, and in many ways, the challenge you place before us to become more engaged and aware and to step forward, to step up. Thank you, Justice Tulloch, for reminding us that tomorrow is indeed the first annual National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I remind everybody it's a day that honors lost children and survivors of residential schools, their families and communities. And a very simple way you can all acknowledge the day is wear an orange shirt, because that is the color of the Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Thank you all to our audience this evening for joining us and for taking your time to consider these issues of great import to us. Temple Heart Zion continues to provide educational programmings, not simply for our members, but for our community members. And we do hope you will join us again. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And with that, I bid you all a very good evening. Oh, and Justice Brownstone, good luck in your upcoming retirement. I want to know whether it's a book or a television program.
Go on Google and check it out. It's already there.
I know. Thank you so much.
Wonderful to see you all. Wonderful to see you, Justice Lampkin, and of course, Justice Tulloch. And thank you, Mr. Finkelstein, for organizing this.
Well, I got to thank you guys. I knew how great you were, how bright and capable you were, and that you would present a great presentation. And I appreciate the Temple and Sherry and Gwen for